Welcome to the program. I'm Jeff Schechtman. We have come to believe that politics, especially in the world of 24/7 news cycles and social media, is an outside game. Our great contemporary politicians like Bill Clinton feed off the interaction with people and are powered by attention. In a time when we can elect a reality show star as president, when celebrity politics is the lifeblood of the American political class, it's hard to imagine a politician or a world leader, for that matter, whose life is private, who keeps their own counsel, who listens first, who shuns celebrity, and yet proves very powerful as a leader. Such was Angela Merkel, who served for 16 years as Chancellor of Germany, its first and only woman chancellor, and was without question the glue that held parts of the world and certainly the Western alliance together for many years. What will history tell us about Angela Merkel, and what can we learn from this Greta Garbo of geopolitics? To find out, we have to dip into Kati Marton's new biography of Merkel entitled The Chancellor. Kati Marton is the New York Times best-selling author of 9 previous books. She was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award and an award-winning former NPR correspondent and ABC News bureau chief in Germany. It is my pleasure to welcome Kati Marton back to this program to talk about The Chancellor, the remarkable odyssey of Angela Merkel. Kati, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, it's such a pleasure to be back with you, and thanks for having me. I love your show, and I love the region from where you operate.
Well, it's a delight to have you here. When you took on this project, when you decided you were going to spend all this time with Angela Merkel and learning about her, talk a little bit about what surprised you the most, because the thing that is so striking, and certainly we'll talk about her specifically, is just how out of context in many ways she is from contemporary politics, and yet she was very contemporary.
Wow. Well, first of all, let me just say that was the most eloquent introduction to the Chancellor that I've had in the weeks that I've been promoting it. So thank you for that. You really set it up brilliantly, and I love you comparing her to Greta Garbo because I hadn't thought of that, frankly, and it's so apt. I mean, her ferocious privacy. Her "I want to be left alone" 16 years as the most powerful woman in the world makes her really a unique character for our time. And even though she has recently left the Chancellery, she has now entered history, she leaves such important lessons, really, for all of us. Let me just say that, first of all, for women, because she is the most powerful woman since, well, maybe Catherine the Great, one of her role models, the Russian Empress, or Elizabeth the First. But not only for women, for all politicians, I would really urge them to read this book as sort of a manual for how to get and keep power. And really for all of us who have lost faith in politics and in politicians, because Angela Merkel was all about getting the job done. She has really now introduced a new kind of politics that is ego-free politics. So it's just remarkable how much she got done, and we'll talk about that, by not taking credit for doing things, by very quietly letting others take credit for it. So, I mean, there are tons of lessons. I sometimes think that I've written a kind of an update of The Prince, of Machiavelli's The Prince, maybe call it The Princess, although Merkel is anything but a princess. But in terms of what a canny and cunning politician she has been, and yet never departed from her moral core. As you can see, after 5 years of living inside her head, I come away, usually you come away from too much exposure to your subject with a sense of disillusionment, but not at all in this case. I come away admiring more than even at the outset, and I was pretty much an admirer when I started 5 years ago. And the thing that triggered my interest in her was in 2015 when she opened Germany's borders to 1 million, mostly Middle Eastern refugees from many of the wars that we started, but then we weren't so welcoming of refugees from Iraq, Afghanistan, and then ultimately Syria. But she was uniquely welcoming. I say uniquely because her partners in the European Union were busy erecting walls and unspooling barbed wire against the flood of migrants. But Merkel did the opposite, and I'm happy to report that 5 years on, those 1 million Middle Eastern refugees, so coming from a culture radically different from the largely Christian, largely white German population, have been integrated into German society. So she's done what she was told was simply impossible, which is to assimilate such a huge number of newcomers from such different ethnicities, faiths, etc. She's done it.
How much of the way she was successful comes from her and really being sui generis to her, given her training as a scientist growing up in East Germany? How much of what she did and the way she did it could ever be replicated, for example, by anyone else?
Well, I mean, you're quite right. I mean, there will not be another Merkel, precisely because her journey has been so sui generis is a very good word. So unmatchable, unbeatable. The combination of 35 years spent as a captive of a police state, East Germany, and at the same time being raised by a pastor. Her father was a Lutheran pastor, a very austere man of extraordinary high standards for his daughter, who never quite gained his approval. Believe it or not, Jeff, her parents never voted for her in her 16 years as chancellor, which I found that to be among the extraordinary. And neither have her siblings. So this is a pretty tough family. She, however, did not embark as a politician at the outset. She was brilliant, always the first in her class. Now we're talking about the unification of East and West Germany. We're talking about East Germany under Moscow's thumb. She chose science as a safe field, tougher for the state to manipulate facts in science than in obviously politics, humanities, any of the more liberal arts fields. Science was her sanctuary. But the minute the wall fell in 1989, she crossed from East to West Berlin, typically because she's an extraordinarily cautious person, with, by the way, the notable exception of what she did with refugees. But I'm sure we'll revert to that subject. That was really out of character for her. But anyway, in 1989, she crossed from East to West Berlin, dipped her toe in the West, and the next day she was back in her lab in East Berlin because she is simply not someone who gets carried away by, even as the tectonic plates of history were shifting. She was going to take her time. That's another of she will not be rushed. She is very self-possessed, I would say, and always gathers evidence and information and facts before she makes her move. However, when she sees an opening, she goes for it, and this has characterized her 16 astonishing years, her meteoric ascent from she sheds her white lab coat in 1989, and a year later she is already in the cabinet of Chancellor Helmut Kohl as Minister for Women and Youth. I had the privilege, Jeff, of meeting her not long after that when she was minister. As you mentioned, I had been the ABC correspondent in Germany during the latter years of the Cold War. And then by the time she became minister, I was no longer I was no longer an ABC correspondent, but I was married to the man who negotiated the end to the war in the Balkans, Richard Holbrooke. And Merkel, the way she works is that she always wants to meet with people who get stuff done and learn from them. She is constantly learning, and even now in her mid 60s, she has a voracious appetite for facts and information, which she then processes with her photographic memory. But at any rate, I was present at this meeting that she had asked for because she wanted to know from Richard, my husband, how to negotiate. And I have to, because I did observe Richard Holbrooke negotiate with the Balkan warlords, and then I was, in the last few years, as I was writing my book about the Chancellor, I observed her negotiations, and the contrast is really quite interesting because Richard used, he had a very powerful personality, and he used threats and charm, and strategic thinking as well. Diplomacy isn't just about passing drinks around in a fancy hotel, although there's some of that. Merkel has a different technique. She uses this powerful intellect, this photographic memory, to always outplay the guy across the table from her. And alas, it has almost always been a guy. And she was cursed with having some of the worst demagogues in recent history as her contemporaneous leaders. So we're talking about, well, first of all, Vladimir Putin, who Putin was her longest running, I describe it as a dysfunctional marriage between the two of them because they know each other so well. And they really have a strange, I would say, grudging respect for each other. Putin, you notice today in the negotiations on Ukraine, for example, Putin is not negotiating. He's sending his guys, his deputy foreign minister, to negotiate with our deputy secretary of state. Well, with Merkel, Putin was always at the table because he has tremendous respect for her, and in a way, she for him. So they stopped the last she stopped the last Ukrainian aggression of his in 2014. I hope our negotiators are studying how she did that, by the way. But sorry, I digressed from your initial point because you see I get very enthusiastic on this subject.
Stay on this for a minute on her relationship with Putin, because it really speaks in so many ways to her character, because he did everything he could to try and get her off balance, to get under her skin, including the incident which you can talk about with the dogs, and she held steady.
Yes, yes. Well, this is her superpower, is that she's got this iron self-control. Another thing our politicians might copy from her example is that when Putin first met her, he gave her the so-called KGB test. As you know, he was a KGB agent in Germany for many years. And the KGB eye-staring contest consists of who's going to blink first. Well, she did not. Then he tried unleashing. Putin knew that she was afraid of dogs because she'd been bitten by one, and he was told that by Merkel's aides. So what does he do? He unleashes his large black lab in their first meeting, and she just froze in place. Never. I mean, to study her expression, it is one of absolute self-control. And that is how, and this drives the autocrat across the table. Let's flash forward to Donald Trump, who also tried to shake her self-control and also failed. At one point, he tossed a couple of Starburst candies that he fished out of his pocket, probably covered in lint, tossed them at her at a G7 a conference and in Ottawa, and the rest of the powerful gathering of heads of state around that table were absolutely aghast. He tossed them at Trump, tosses the candies at Merkel and says, "Don't say I never gave you anything, Angela." And it was as if she didn't notice. And of course, nothing annoys a bully more than when you don't get a reaction. And she knows that. So she's well practiced in the fine art of driving bullies crazy.
Talk about her sense of Germany and her sense of place about Germany, having grown up in the East, and as it evolved, as her view of the country as it evolved over her career.
Yes. Well, she has, because she grew up in the East, she didn't learn about the Holocaust because in the East, the mythology of the East was that we were the good Germans, that the West was the Nazis, and therefore never went through the process of assimilating the lessons from Germany's darkest history under the Nazis, and so Merkel had a lot of learning to do. But because once she joined, once East and West were unified, but because she has such a hard moral core that goes back to her Lutheran beginnings, she completely absorbed that lesson. And among her first trips was a trip to Israel, where she addressed the first German chancellor to address the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. Partly she addressed them in Hebrew, and said during that speech that the fate of Israel and the fate of the Jews is a foundational element of Germany's raison d'être, Germany's reason for existence. And therefore, she married the two countries' fates together. And she is, although she had no success with negotiating with Netanyahu, kind of gave up on him, but she frankly didn't think he was very serious about negotiating. But her commitment to the global Jewish community is total, as is her commitment that Germany will never again descend into darkness. And among her last trips as chancellor, in fact, I described this in the book, was a trip to Auschwitz, where she reiterates that this was a German crime and that we Germans have a debt that will never be repaid. So, she leaves so many powerful lessons for her successors. But I think that it's no coincidence, Jeff, that Putin is now testing the West's willpower and ability to resist his brinkmanship in Ukraine. It's no coincidence that he's doing that, just weeks after Merkel's departure from the world stage. He's testing us, and I frankly am worried, and I already miss her. And because she didn't believe in military solutions to problems. She thought that once you resort to using armies, that means you've failed, and that military conflicts have unintended consequences. But just for a second, to return to your initial question about what it was that surprised me about her in my pursuit of this inscrutable subject. And that is, she really isn't who we think she is, because she's so private, for which I applaud her. And in fact, her privacy has enabled her to be strong for 16 years, because she didn't share every emotion. She doesn't do social media. So she preserved a whole side of herself for herself. But she's actually, she's not this stolid, rather prudish person. She loves to have a good time. She loves to stay up late with a drink or two. Has a killer sense of humor. Her imitation of Putin is a great stress relief for her and for her staff. And she's very warm in my periodic interactions with her. I always felt a sense that she likes women. As people, which you can't say about a lot of leaders. She surrounded herself with powerful women in her administration. She made a lot of space for women to rise in Germany. She made marriage equality the law of the land. So she's by no means, a prude or any other things that we might associate with her, because she doesn't open up. Germans themselves don't know anything about her personal life, or virtually none. And sometimes I'm asked by Germans, the ones that knew that I was working on this book, does the Chancellor have grandchildren? Can you imagine, Jeff, in our age of total exposure, not to know if your head of state has kids or grandkids?
The other thing that's remarkable is to be in power for 16 years anywhere without real scandal, which was so much a part of this sense of privacy.
Yes. Not a single tell-all book has come out of her chancellery. And by the way, she has the same tiny team, consists of 3 or 4 people, leaving the chancellery as she did going out. When Obama went to say goodbye to Merkel as he was leaving the White House in 2016, he looked around and her office and said, "Wow, you guys still all here?" Because it was the same team that he first met 8 years before. So, contrast that with, the revolving door of the White House, where and to say nothing of all the tell-all books that have poured forth from the Trump years. So not a breath of scandal. She doesn't care about accumulating stuff. She thinks that that just weighs you down. She likes to travel light, and she lives in the same rent control apartment now in the heart of Berlin, actually the eastern part of Berlin, that she has for 25 years. She's got a very modest little cottage in the woods of Brandenburg, which is where she's spending time now, decompressing. So there's no way to bribe or I can't picture Angela Merkel on a yacht, frankly, or hanging out with greasy billionaires. That's just not her scene. She likes to hang out with writers and actors and musicians and creative people. She finds politicians who endlessly repeat themselves. That's a quote from her. Rather dull company.
Is there something that she would have liked to have accomplished in her 16 years as chancellor that she wasn't able to do?
Absolutely, yes. She announced 2 years ago in her annual speech to the nation that she would devote herself to climate change. As a scientist, she really does take the threat to our climate very seriously. And that was going to be how she would end her reign, if I can call it that, because until then, we're talking now 2019. Until then, from 2005, when she first went to the chancellery, when she first became chancellor, to 2019, it had been one rolling crisis. So she was a terrific crisis manager. I mean, the Eurozone meltdown, the migration crisis, the Brexit, and then 4 years of Trump. I mean, it was just, she never paused to breathe. But the last 2 years were going to be on climate change, and then 6 weeks later, after this speech, came COVID. And so for the final 2 years of her term, she again became a crisis manager, COVID being her final crisis. So that I if I can make a prediction, it would be that when she emerges from a well-deserved break, I think that we will hear from Merkel on the subject of the urgent need for us to take climate seriously, starting now. In fact, it should have started quite a while ago. But that would be my best guess. She won't take another job. There's no. I mean, what sort of a job can top or match being chancellor of Europe's powerhouse, Germany. But I think we will be hearing from her on climate and likely also on women's empowerment in countries where they're not yet empowered, namely Africa. I know she cares a great deal about that.
How did she know that it was time to step aside?
Well, by the way, it's a historic first for a German chancellor to leave voluntarily,
right.
not to be driven out. But again, she's a very shrewd and very calm operator, and she said years ago, I quote her in the book as saying, "I'm going to leave before I'm a political wreck, and while I can still have another life." And actually, she was planning on leaving in 2016, and at her final meeting with Obama, the one I already referred to when he came to say goodbye, it was a very emotional dinner that just the two of them that I describe in quite a bit of detail. So Trump had just been elected, and that blew up her plans to leave and Obama really came down hard in arguing with her against leaving. You cannot. They had by now become quite I would say, good friends. In fact, Obama's aide, Ben Rhodes, characterized it to me as love between the two of them. Particularly on Obama's side, he really Merkel was the head of state that he most admired and emulated. But at any rate, she stayed on because of Trump, because she was so worried about what would happen to the Western alliance left to Trump with Putin making mischief from Moscow, and which he of course continued to do, and played Trump like a violin, and all the other demagogues rising in the world, notably Xi Jinping in China. She made more trips to China than any other head of state, by the way. So she stayed on for 4 years longer than she anticipated, and now she feels that she's leaving Germany in a very strong position. Trump has been defeated. Putin, of course, outlived her. Is still in power with no plans to leave. And the other thing is that okay, so yes, Biden won, and but Merkel is a huge admirer of America. She credits her second chance to America. Second chance being as a free person after the fall of communism. She is very worried now about America's future and about its ability to lead the West, because Trump may be gone, but Trumpism lives on. And she's followed very carefully the events of January 6th and was horrified by that. She's had a hard time kind of reconciling what happened on January 6th with her vision of America as this beacon of rule of law and human rights, etc.
Talk a little bit about, before we wrap up, her sense of America, her sense of the country, a country that could elect Barack Obama, followed by Donald Trump. What did she think of that?
Yeah. Well, it's been shattering for her. She gave a powerful speech at Harvard. She was the commencement speaker 2 years ago now, and she talked about she gave the sort of speech she would not give in Germany, because in Germany she never opens up about her own history. In the East, but this was an emotional speech, and she talked about what America stands for, and how it's very important for she was addressing the graduates, the youth of today, to reclaim that responsibility to lead from a place of tolerance and openness to immigrants. And I mean, it was so ironic for me to observe this, the head of the former Third Reich lecturing in a gentle tone, but nevertheless, the message was shape up America. So kind of a role reversal. She loves America. She loves the West. She loves the California coast. That was her first trip once the wall came down. She and her husband. Her husband is also a scientist, and they went to their destination was San Diego, but they drove along the Pacific coast, and she was just blown away by the beauty of the nature, and for her, seeing the Pacific Ocean for the first time was a breathtaking experience. So she loves America. She loves our history. In her office, she had a picture of Bush the elder standing beside the wall, and of Ronald Reagan, whom she met on her first trip to the United States as a young minister. And, these were the heroes of the Cold War for her.
Finally, talk a little bit about what you think she would most like to be remembered for.
Well, I tried to pry out of her via her aides, because she does not sit down for full interviews with anybody, because that would be a betrayal of her sense of privacy, her need for privacy. She will talk about specific policies, but not this book. My book is not about that. My book was an attempt to get beneath the surface, to get the human story, which I think is so interesting. But she would like, I think, to be remembered for her generous refugee policy, which has been a success, as a template for others to follow. So the next time there's a wave of which there inevitably be, particularly with climate wreaking havoc in so many places, there will be another migration wave, and she has left us a template for how to deal with that. So I think that would be number one. I think keeping the West more or less unified under the onslaught of Donald Trump in combination with Putin. Opening up much more space for women. Those are significant things. But finally, I think and most importantly, it's transforming Germany, really. She would never say this because she's far too modest. She's got a robust ego, but she doesn't believe in self-promotion. I would say transforming Germany from being the economic powerhouse of Europe to becoming the moral center of the world, which is an enormous transformation when you think about it.
Kati Marton, the book is The Chancellor, The Remarkable Odyssey of Angela Merkel. Kati, I thank you so much for spending time with us.
Oh, thank you so much, Jeff. It's been a real pleasure, and be careful and stay healthy, you and all your listeners.
And you as well.
Thanks
Thank you.